Good evening. Welcome to today's class. Today I'm handling topic 4 of public procurement, and topic 4 is about general procurement principles and rules. So this topic, we shall handle the general procurement principles, and then we come to the general procurement rules. So rules and principles are guidelines to assist in public procurement to be able to achieve competition, accountability, economy, efficiency, and all those values in public procurement. So rules are usually put in place, principles are put in place to be able to facilitate public procurement. So we shall look at principles. Principles are many different aspects of public procurement, but to differentiate principles and rules, rules is the public procurement process. In the Public Procurement Act, they are called rules. So it stipulates the procedure you are supposed to follow from the time you start a procurement process up to the time it ends. Those are rules, but principles are diverse areas in public procurement that require to be followed. So if you are to differentiate them that way, now you realize that principles are many. You look at many different aspects of public procurement and how you can be able to manage them. So for example, I'll mention some few principles and we see how you go about it. So the first principle is procurement and asset disposal planning. Before any procurement process begins, there has to be planning. Planning for procurement and planning for asset disposal. So planning, coming up with a plan is deciding on where to buy, who to buy from, and the process to use for buying. It means when you're coming up with a procurement plan, you're making a decision on what to buy, when to buy, from whom to buy, and the method to buy. So it means you plan for that procurement. You cannot start procurement without plan. And plan is linked to the budget. So it means for planning to be successful, there has to be a budget. So we normally call a plan a budget implementation instrument. So it helps you to implement the budget. So it means when you have a budget, planning becomes easy. So you can decide how much to buy, what to buy, the price to buy, the method of buying, and even the suppliers to use. So when you have a budget, then planning becomes easy. So you can do planning in procurement and you can also do planning in disposal. So both of them require planning. When you want to dispose of unserviceable items, then it means planning has to be there. You have to decide what items are to be disposed of, when are they to be disposed of, at what price are they to be disposed of, and to who. Which method are you supposed to use to dispose them of? So a procurement plan is a very important document in public procurement. It enables you to conduct public procurement in a very efficient manner. So it makes you understand what and when a procurement process is supposed to start, because it is planning that sets off a procurement process. The second procurement principle is procurement pricing and a requirement not to split contracts. Pricing of procurement should be done at the current market price. So it means every procurement, before it is done, the current market price has to be analyzed. You could have researched on the current market price last year, but that last year price is not today's price. So we need to have the current market price. And apart from having the current market price, you are not supposed to split a contract. In public procurement, a contract is one if it is supposed to be one. There are some entities, procuring entities, which try to split contracts so that they can avoid using a certain method of procurement. For example, if you want to avoid using open tendering, you can split that contract so that it looks like you are dealing with so many small contracts, which is not acceptable. So it means you have to procure, or you cannot be able to divide one contract into many different contracts unless there is a very good reason to do that. And the major reason which is acceptable to split a contract is when you want to cater for reservation scheme, whereby you've given 30% of that particular reservation scheme to a particular group. Then it means you can subdivide the contract, but otherwise it is not acceptable. Another principle is registration of suppliers and pre-qualification. Since we cannot always advertise a tender to all the suppliers in the nation, if it is a national tender, then it means you have to register suppliers for a particular good, work or service, and then pre-qualify them. To pre-qualify is to make sure they can be able to meet the qualifications for that particular registration. So you register and then you pre-qualify, so that any other time you may want to procure those items, you don't start from searching from suppliers again, because searching for suppliers or sourcing for suppliers is a very complicated step of a procurement process, and it takes a long period of time. So to avoid that, every time you need to procure items, you should register suppliers and then pre-qualify them. And then after that, we have another principle, and when registering suppliers, there are several areas you look at. Are they qualified? Do they have the legal capacity? Are they members of certain regulated professional bodies? Do they pay taxes? Are they corrupt? So all those factors, you're supposed to look at them so that you don't end up registering a supplier who does not qualify to be registered. In other instances, you can use a list of another state organ, a state organ or a public entity that has already registered suppliers. You can borrow that list literally and use that list for the goods, works or services that you're going to use. So that is a very important step in public procurement. It is a principle, and if you do this principle very well of registering suppliers, when it comes to now the procurement process, it will go very smoothly because you already have a list of registered suppliers. Another principle is having standard procurement and asset disposal documents. They have to be standard, and by standard we mean they have to have all the information. They have to be documents that can be reliable. A document that I can be able to get all the information I want, I can be able to reply to it, and I can be able to do what the document requires without having any conflicts. Another principle is limitation on contracts with state and public officers. State officers, public officers are limited from entering into public procurement contracts. Who are these state officers? These members of committees. We have several committees in public procurement. We have officers of the public entity. We have these state officers and their spouses or children. All of them have limitations. And anytime you want to enter into a public procurement contract and you are a state officer or a public officer, you have to declare that you are a state officer or you are a public officer, so that in case of a conflict of interest, it should be well known. Because naturally there is a conflict of interest. You cannot be able to give your spouse a contract. That is a conflict of interest. So it means you have to declare that you are a state officer, and the proceedings, or it can be determined later on, or as the process goes on, as long as you have been able to declare your conflict of interest. And then we have the performance bond and the tender security. Those are monies required for you to be able to be given a contract, especially if you're dealing with a contract with a lot of money. Then you will be expected to give tender security in whichever case. So it will be determined by the procuring entity, and it will depend on the nature of the contract. For these reserved groups, most times they are not asked for tender security and bonds, performance bonds, especially for the reserved or preserved groups. But for the rest, this is a very important requirement to show that you are determined to be able to enter into that contract. Termination or cancellation of procurement and asset disposal proceedings, they can be terminated. And termination can happen for several reasons. Maybe budget is low, maybe there's no tender which was received, these acts of God, things that come to disrupt a procurement process. All that can cause termination or cancellation of a procurement proceedings. Those among so many other principles, we shall be able to look at them, like the form of communication, which has to be in written form. Any form of communication in public procurement should be written. Notices, tenders, evaluation proceedings, digital signatures, all of them have to be in written form. Corruption is another principle. You're not supposed to be corrupt in public procurement. Confidentiality, especially of information. Information in public procurement is confidential, so it means you have to keep information of prospective tenderers very private. I should not be a tenderer and I get my information has been given out there to everyone. They know what I do, they know the prices I offer, they know the costs I incur, they know the profits I make. That is not confidentiality. So among that, we have so many other principles. And apart from principles, we have the rules. And I said rules, you look at it in form of the procurement process. It starts with the identification of the need. Then you come and make a procurement plan. You prepare specifications. You prepare tender documents. You invite to tender. Bids are then submitted. Tender opening. Tender evaluation, and then we get a professional opinion. You award a contract after the professional opinion, and then they notify the tender process outcome. They notify the person who won the tender and also the rest of why they did not qualify. Then a tender is prepared, then a contract is prepared, and then the contract is signed, and then there is contract performance and management. So when you are looking at procurement rules, it is like someone asking you, explain to us the procurement procedure from the time you identify a need up to the time a contract is given. And in fact, in most cases, it doesn't end when a contract is given. It ends when you have made payment to the contractor or the supplier, and that is when the contract or the particular process ends. So you close that file and then you move on to the next. So the rules is just understanding the procedure or the process of procurement, and the principles understand the major aspects of public procurement, the major things that are supposed to be followed, what you should do in public procurement and what you should not do. If you understand it that way, then this topic becomes easy to analyze. So thank you for joining me in today's class.